Well, it was called one of the most anticipated UFC cards in recent memory, and I think it's safe to say UFC 178 delivered on Saturday night. Demetrius Johnson retained his UFC flyweight title, but so much more happened here at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. There is a lot to digest, and we have MMA Fighting.com's own Shaun Al-Shatti to help us do just that, because Shaun, what a night it was. And typically in these post-fight wrap-ups, we focus first on the main event. I'm going to switch things up. We're going to work backwards. Dominick Cruz comes back, 3-year layoff, 61 seconds he defeats Takei Mizugaki. Dana White says afterwards he's getting the title shot. Is that the right call in your opinion?
That's the only fight you can make. I mean, that was the perfect comeback. Everything about that, from the beginning, from the lights out, and you get the Cypress Hill coming in, how I could just kill a man. He comes out, the whole crowd swells behind him. The card up to that point kind of been a little slow. It just woke everybody up. And then he comes out and does what he does. You see the classic Cruz head movement, insane in and out movement, gets that explosive takedown, just finishes it, and it's violent. It was perfect.
I don't want to say I doubted him, but I didn't expect him to look that good. Did you?
That was the best he's ever looked. To be honest, like that, yeah. Takei Mizugaki is a legitimate opponent. That wasn't even a contest. That was 61 seconds. That was easily the best he's ever looked.
Perhaps there's a theory out there that, you know, the time off allowed him to get maybe a killer instinct. He's no longer at the top of the mountain. He has to prove himself again. Maybe, who knows? You know, Don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Maybe it was a good thing for him.
I mean, I'm sure it wasn't actually a good thing, but if you want to look at it with a positive spin, yeah, I mean, that was 3 years of just pent-up anger and pent-up frustration just coming out in some, like, furious assault. It was incredibly impressive, and I cannot wait to see him fight TJ Dillashaw.
I said it was 61 seconds long, right?
Yeah.
I think it could have been shorter. What do you think?
Yeah.
I thought the stoppage was late.
Yeah, I mean, it was a late stoppage, but at that point I feel like everybody's so enraptured in the moment, everybody's caught up in the moment that, I don't know. Let
me put you on the spot. Who wins, Dillashaw or Cruz?
That is such a good matchup. Just stylistically, that is such a good matchup. You got the originator of this insane footwork versus the new kid who's using the same kind of strategy. I have no idea. I can't.
What are you leaning towards?
We didn't even see enough of Cruz for me to say. I mean, I guess Cruz. Like, I would lean towards Cruz just because if he's going to look like that, and he never lost, and if he comes, I mean, he came out tonight and he just looks so impressive that I would lean towards Cruz. But again, this is so early, and I don't know.
Well, speaking of great comebacks, Kat Zingano came back, her first fight since April of 2013. Started off slow, finished very strong. It was actually reminiscent of the Miesha Tate fight. What do you think of her performance, and does she deserve a title shot based on what she did here tonight?
She absolutely deserves a title shot, and her performance was remarkable. I feel like no one in at least that division, or maybe even MMA, fights with such emotion that she does. Like, her fights are emotional to watch, and it's crazy just as a viewing experience. I mean, but that whole entire second and third round, especially the third round, was so violent. It was incredibly impressive.
You know, it feels like there's a big gap between Ronda Rousey and the other contenders at 135. Where do you put her? Because for a while we just kind of had to put her on the sidelines. She wasn't active. Do you think she can actually beat Ronda Rousey, or at least give her a tougher test than she's had thus far in the UFC?
I mean, I would still pick Rousey to take that fight. But even when Kat Zingano, you know, when she got out last year with her long layout, before that she was an incredibly, you know, up-and-coming prospect. That was a very interesting prospect, undefeated, and she looked so good against Miesha. And again, you just see this kind of rage come out of her during the fights. I think that may be, you know, the toughest opponent for Ronda yet.
Let's talk about Yoel Romero versus Tim Kennedy. What a fascinating fight. Highs and lows. Every guy, you know, both guys had their moments, but then end of the second round, Tim Kennedy looks like he's just seconds away from finishing Romero, which would be a huge fight, maybe his biggest win yet, right? And then we get to the point in between the second and third round. Kennedy is ready to go. Stoolgate, very well said. And Romero's just sitting there. And, of course, they're wiping him off, and it looks like he's, you know, stalling. Dana White brought out the theory that maybe they put too much Vaseline on him to stall, but then we find out it was a UFC doctor who did it. What's your take on what happened here? Was it illegal?
I mean, of course it was illegal. It was, let's be honest, it was ridiculous. I mean, Yoel Romero's corner was right next to media row. So, well, first of all, I'm going to say that if Tim Kennedy had like 20 more seconds, that fight was over, and it wasn't even a question. But Yoel Romero's corner was right next to media row. And when the second round was over, he kind of staggered over to us, and he couldn't even stand. Like, he was having to lean against the cage to support himself. He looked completely out. I mean, we talked to Bob Bennett, the executive director of the Nevada State Athletic Commission.
What did he say?
he said that Tim Kennedy can review it, but historically cases like these don't get reversed, which doesn't make sense to me because he also said very clearly that a rule was broken. So the whole thing is very bizarre to me, and honestly, it's inexcusable.
So do you think that Romero should be punished, not punished by the UFC or the commission, but as far as his ascension up the ranks, should he not get the big fight that a win like this would warrant?
I don't know, man. It's such a strange situation. I wouldn't, honestly, if they said tomorrow they booked a rematch, I wouldn't argue, would you?
No, and you feel for Kennedy, right? So close. Absolutely. He's been, through so much in this game. You feel for him. I wonder what they're going to do with Romero. Anyone, if it's not a rematch, come to mind? I mean, does a Jacare fight make sense? Because you're so close. I mean, a Kennedy win, there aren't that many guys between him and a title shot at this point. Yeah. Is Jacare a little bit above Romero? Do you not think that makes sense?
Yeah, I wouldn't book that fight, especially with the way this fight ended and the controversy surrounding it. And, I mean, if Tim Kennedy is going to appeal, I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I would assume that he does, especially considering the Vine that we saw of him just freaking out backstage. He's going to appeal. I'm assuming that process is going to take forever because everything with Nevada takes forever. So, I mean, can you really even act until that's finalized? Because if it gets overturned, which who knows if it will, but if it does, the rematch is pretty much what you have to book.
Let's talk about the people's main event. So many people doubted Conor McGregor. He showed up amidst a sea of Irishmen. It was like an Irish army. It was like we were in Dublin, Ireland all over again. And he comes out, and as he predicted and his coach predicted, he finishes Dustin Poirier in the first round. Now, first off, the finish. What do you think of it? Some talk back of the head. Some talk, that it was right on that sweet spot there, that it looks a little weird at first, but it's not exactly illegal. What do you think?
It's interesting because it's that weird gray area where, it's right there. I mean, it depends on your definition of back of the head. But also, they're standing and it's a moving target. It's very hard to actually call that as illegal because you're moving, I don't know. I don't have a problem with it, but I can see how somebody would.
And, the win is made even more impressive by the fact that he said he injured his thumb 4 weeks out, injured ligaments.
Too.
Absolutely. And even considered, he admitted afterwards, that he considered for a second of pulling out of the fight. So are there any questions left about this guy, or is he the real deal in your opinion?
I mean, I feel like this secured it, right? Like, he's the real deal. I mean, Dustin Poirier got finished from, I don't know the official time, but within 2 minutes. That's ridiculously impressive, even discounting, all the back of the head stuff. Just the fact that Conor McGregor was able to predict this, and it happened. It came true again. I mean, this is ridiculous. Dana White called it the biggest thing he's ever seen. That's a little ridiculous. Yes. But this is a crazy ride right now, and I'm super curious to see where it goes.
What impressed you more, his performance or his three-piece suit, the white elephant trunk? I don't even know what he was saying, but it was a good description. He built it up. What do you think?
I mean, the suit didn't disappoint. The suit was incredibly sharp.
I will say it was a little loose-fitting. I mean, I would like to see it a little tighter. But now I'm nitpicking.
I mean, the suit was pretty sharp. But, I mean, you look at this post-fight press conference, it was basically the Conor McGregor show. And within, once he got there and he started going and he was going on and on and on, within, 10 minutes of that, you could see that the other 6 fighters on the dais were starting to get, why are we here?
Demetrius Johnson was asked one question at the post-fight press conference, and typically at these things, Dana White does a scrum. There was no Dana White scrum. There was a Conor McGregor scrum, perhaps a sign of the times, a changing of the guard. What do you do with him next? Do you give him a title shot? Do you give him the winner of Aldo Mendez, or do you think he has to fight one more, especially when you have Cub Swanson out there who's fighting Frankie Edgar November 22nd?
Well, see, that's the thing. I was going to say that's the problem, but it's not really a problem because if you have a division that's so full of people that deserve, title shots to move up, that's not a problem. But that division is so rich with talent and people who are on good streaks. I mean, even you just have guys like Dennis Bermudez who aren't even getting looked at for this type of conversation. But just, you have the Cub Swanson versus Frankie Edgar fight. I wouldn't, again, I said this beforehand, and I think I stick with it. I wouldn't be opposed to giving if they gave him a title shot. But if it was me, I would book one more fight just to kind of build this a little bit more. Because I feel like with each time we see this guy, it becomes a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. Yeah. And if we just hold off a little bit more, by the time, if he can get past one more, we get to a McGregor-Aldo, it would be massive.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of very close to a title shot, Donald Cerrone has never gotten a title shot in the UFC, but he's never had a run quite like this. He defeats Eddie Alvarez, a dominant win, started off slow, but really came on strong second, especially the third round. Was that enough in your opinion in a division that is very loaded right now, and especially he lost to Anthony Pettis in the UFC? What do you do with him?
I mean, he's in a weird situation, and even that fight was strange because it seemed like the first round, this is is going to be the same thing. It's gonna follow the same narrative that his whole career is that he got here and he kind of froze up, and then he completely changed around his strategy, made adjustments, turned on the pressure, started going with the low kicks. So I mean that in and of itself was impressive, but he is in a weird situation in that most of the people above him he's already fought and lost against. I mean you have Dos Anjos, you have the champion Pettis, he fought Benson a couple times. I wouldn't be opposed to if Nurmagomedov doesn't get the title shot, making that fight.
Right.
But I mean, that whole division is such a weird mess because of how long it's been stagnant that I don't know. It's a weird call.
Perhaps he should root for Gilbert Melendez to win the belt, and that would be a fresh matchup for him. And finally, speaking of champions, let's talk about Demetrious Johnson. It was kind of an afterthought, you know, all week long, and he was only asked one question at the press conference. But I thought he needed to look dominant, and he did. He went out there and finished Kariusa in the second round via a Kimura. You know, what do you make of Demetrious now? Because it just seems like there's nothing really interesting out there for him. There are no real tests, especially with Dotson being injured for quite some time, and he wants to take some time, so that buys him some time. But it just seems like I hate the criticism that he receives, because you need two to tango, and he keeps showing up, but he's showing up against guys who really aren't on his level. So what do you do with him, in your opinion?
You know, he said he wants to take some time. I think he's earned that time. Yeah. He's been
most active UFC champion by far.
He's been insanely consistent. The Dodson thing it's interesting. That's an incredibly interesting fight. I mean, I would like to see the rematch because that was his only real.
But he beat him.
Yeah, he beat him, but it was a close
He beat
fight.
McCall and he beat Benavidez, the top three guys, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's still guys out there. I mean, you still have guys like John Lineker, Horiguchi coming up. But I mean, it's looking bleak. Like there isn't very many people.
Do you find interest in just seeing him clean out a division, just seeing a dominant champion perform? Does that, you know, is that enough for you to tune in and feel like, oh, this is an interesting story from a journalist and fan perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would still tune in just because, you know, it's always compelling to see an athlete of that, you know, extremely high caliber. But I mean, you gotta feel for the guy. I mean, once Alvarez Cerrone ended and the main event started, it seemed like people were kind of filing out of the stadium or the arena. They kind of came back once the fight began, and I think that was more or less just people saying, you know, if something insane happens, I don't want to be the guy that walked out on it. But as soon as that fight finished, they were out. They were gone. They bolted. Like, by the time they were doing the post-fight interview with Joe Rogan, half the arena was empty. I just feel for the guy because it's not his fault. He's incredibly talented. There's just no one else to really prop him up.
Yeah, there is a McCall fight coming up against Lineker, so we'll see what happens there. Lineker could be a new challenge for him. But for now, Demetrious Johnson still the very best at 125 pounds and arguably one of the very best in the sport, pound for pound. Unlike UFC 73 stacked, UFC 178 lived up to the hype. A great night here in Las Vegas, Nevada. A lot of great performances, a lot of movers and shakers, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to the big winners here tonight because there were some pretty big statements made.
Absolutely.
For Shaun, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching our coverage all week long from here in Las Vegas. We'll see you on Monday for the MMA Hour.